Welcome to The Deep Dive. Today we're taking a look at some pretty unique source material. It's excerpts from an audio file called New York Times and Pelosi Caught in Fake News Scandal.mp3, right? And our goal here is really to unpack the claims made in this source. It talks about things like alleged political subversion, deep state influence, and challenges to, well, established narratives.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, I think, is how this particular source weaves together all these different threads. Accusation, suspicion, it's quite a mix.
Definitely.
So we'll be pulling out let's say, the most provocative claims directly from the audio to
Yeah.
give you a sense of the specific viewpoint on, recent political happening.
Okay, so let's dive right in. The source starts with a really central claim, doesn't it? This idea of a deep state fifth column.
Mm-hmm.
For anyone listening, a fifth column usually means like a hidden group trying to undermine things from the inside. And here, the source says it was targeting the Trump administration specifically.
Exactly. And framing it that way as a fifth column, well, it tells you a lot about how the source views these actions.
Yes, sir.
It suggests it's not just, normal politics. It's seen as something more insidious, an internal threat, almost like a betrayal from within the system itself.
Right.
And the alleged goal, according to this material, was pretty stark: delegitimize, undermine, and sabotage the administration.
And it names names, or at least one big one, General Flynn.
Yes, specifies General Flynn as the, quote, #1 target of this alleged group.
Wow. And the source then says this fifth column wasn't acting alone, it mentions. Who again?
It claims they acted, and this is a direct quote, in concert with both the Democratic and Republican establishment along with the mainstream media.
That's quite the coalition. Democrats, Republicans, and the media all working together. That's a huge claim.
Yeah.
How does the source support that?
Well, it paints this picture of a very widespread, coordinated effort. It doesn't necessarily lay out, chapter and verse how they coordinated, but it asserts that they did. And then it moves on to a really striking specific example involving Foreign Policy magazine.
Ah, yes, I remember this part. What was the claim there?
The source asserts that Foreign Policy reported, quote, "Russian insiders fear Washington establishment will assassinate Trump."
That's intense.
Yeah.
And the source really leans into the supposed credibility of Foreign Policy magazine here, doesn't it?
It does. It makes a point of saying, this isn't some rumor off an internet forum.
Right. It mentions the Washington Post connection.
Exactly. Printed by the Washington Post Company, edited by David Rothkopf. It names him, specifically calls him a top globalist Council on Foreign Relations member, managing director of Kissinger Associates. The source literally calls this the real deal.
So the implication is this isn't just some fringe outlet. It's connected to the establishment itself, yet reporting this extreme fear of assassination.
Precisely. And then the source goes further. It alleges that, quote, "the entire mainstream media narrative has been backing that up for over a year now that Trump's going to be assassinated."
Backing it up, how? Does it give examples?
It does. It mentions things like New York Times columnists, other mainstream media hacks tweeting, even the London Times tweeting, "When's the assassination happening?" These are the examples cited.
And the source suggests this isn't just idle talk, but potentially building a narrative. What does it claim the reaction would be if something did happen?
It's quite explicit. The source alleges that if an assassination attempt were made, quote, "they will celebrate it."
Wow.
Yeah. And it draws a parallel, interestingly, to celebrating, quote, "so-called Nazis getting punched."
And how does the source define so-called Nazis in this context?
It defines it as, quote, "anyone who disagrees with them." And it also links this idea to what it sees as legitimizing violence to shut down a speech by Milo Yiannopoulos.
Okay, so there's a lot there, connecting media narratives, alleged threats, and a justification, or perceived justification, of political violence.
Mhm. A very specific and alarming picture painted by the source material.
Now, beyond the media and this alleged fifth column, the source also takes aim at more visible opposition groups, right? It mentions the resistance.
Yes. It talks about the leftists calling themselves the resistance.
And what's the source's take on them? That doesn't sound positive.
Not at all. The source claims they couldn't be deeper in bed with the actual establishment that has poisoned America for decades.
Deeper in bed with the establishment. Who does it mean by the establishment there?
It specifically names the military-industrial complex and the deep state.
So it's accusing the resistance of actually being aligned with the very forces like the deep state that the source itself is criticizing.
Exactly. It calls this absolutely astounding delusion on behalf of the left. It really draws a sharp line, suggesting these groups are fundamentally mistaken about who their allies and enemies are from the source's perspective.
Okay, so we've got these broad claims about hidden forces, media narratives, external opposition. Does the source get more specific about potential issues within the administration itself, like personnel?
It does, yeah. It brings up Rance Priebus, citing Breitbart's speculation about his future at the time.
And what's the allegation regarding Priebus?
The source presents him as either one of these neocon insiders or just completely incompetent.
Neocon insider.
Yeah.
That term implies a specific kind of establishment figure, doesn't it?
Yes, typically associated with a more interventionist foreign policy and seen by some, including this source apparently, as part of the establishment the administration was supposedly fighting against. The source uses the troubled rollout of the travel ban as evidence for the incompetence claim, calling it a disaster.
Right. And this ties into another claim about potential Yateses, referencing Sally Yates, the acting attorney general who was fired.
Yeah, that's right. It uses her as sort of a template. The allegation is that, quote, Obama administration holdovers managed to get into positions across the Trump administration.
And the source describes them how, not just as holdovers, right?
No, it says they're hiding like sleeper cells everywhere.
Sleeper cells. That's strong language. Does it give any indication of scale?
It actually throws out a number, as many as 50 of them throughout government.
50 alleged sleeper cells. And it links this back to Priebus.
Yes. The source claims Priebus had full knowledge of their whereabouts, who they are, and what potential for damage they may cause.
So accusing him of either complicity or negligence in allowing these supposed cells to remain.
That seems to be the implication, and the alleged motivation for these people.
What does the source say drives them?
It claims they're just waiting to leak more information, and that this is putting the national security of the country completely at risk. The source attributes this motivation to, quote, Trump derangement syndrome, mass hysteria.
So again, framing internal dissent or leaks not as whistleblowing or policy disagreement, but as a kind of irrational, dangerous sabotage.
Exactly. That's the consistent perspective presented throughout this material.
Okay. We're nearing the end of the key claims from this source material. What's the final point it touches on?
It concludes with a concern about internet censorship.
Censorship. How does it frame that?
It claims that communist Chinese-style net censorship is, quote, already here on the web and is being announced.
Already here. That's a strong statement.
It is. And the source emphasizes a belief that people need to stay involved to keep the internet open and free. It sort of ties this concern about information control back into the broader narrative of hidden forces and narrative manipulation.
Got it. So wrapping this deep dive up, if we look at the whole picture presented in this source, what are the main takeaways? It feels like there's a really strong undercurrent of suspicion.
Absolutely.
A suspicion of an embedded establishment, this deep state. Then these direct allegations of sabotage against an administration. And running through it all, major concerns about media narratives and who controls information.
It's a narrative of hidden conflict, really, of unseen forces manipulating events and information behind the scenes.
It certainly presents a very specific and quite dramatic interpretation of political events.
It definitely does. And listening to this, it naturally leads to a question, I think, for you, the listener.
Which is,
when you're presented with claims like these, really stark, dramatic claims about hidden forces, systemic opposition, maybe even conspiracies, how do you personally approach that? How do you dissect it, understand the different perspectives, and sort through what's being presented in public discussion?